If you knew for a fact that at the end of December, that was it, December 31st, all right, life is over. Angel of death comes, there's some unfortunate or unexpected incidents that results in Kabzi's beautiful soul flying up into the heavens. The question then is that if
to the real great one.
Indeed, yeah, to the Akbar, Kabir to the Akbar.
Yeah, exactly.
So if he knew that today, how would he feel? So for a lot of people who are caught up in corporate work, generally speaking, most of them, if they could get an independent source of income that wasn't that work, then they would probably change the work that they're up to. So then it also gets them to think about, well, what the extent to which finances are a motivation, and the extent to which the inherent purpose is a motivation for the work that they're doing.
You left NZF behind, at least physically, and you have embarked on this almost like portfolio career of trying to, I think, instigate change in the community and society and minds, perhaps. And you've got a last day leadership course that is available, I think, on your website. And in it, it's all about mission. So what is your mission in a sentence? Assalamu alaikum everyone, welcome back to the channel. With me I have a returning guest, Mr. Iqbal Nasim, formerly the CEO of NZF, National Zakat Foundation, and also now the founder of iqbalnasim.com. I thought I'd get that in.
It was a really difficult naming exercise, yeah.
Was it taken already? Or?
Well, I did try Iqbal.com, but that was a few $100,000 actually.
Oh, really? Interesting.
So I had to go with the surname, but yeah.
So Iqbal, we're going to dive straight in. You left NZF behind, at least physically, and you have embarked on this almost like portfolio career of trying to, I think, instigate change in the community and society and minds, perhaps. And you've got a last day leadership course that is available, I think, on your website. And in it, it's all about mission. So what is your mission in a sentence?
So my mission in a sentence is to leave behind 10,000 last day leaders. What's a last day leader? Someone who is striving for God's cause. What is God's cause? God's cause is the divine agenda which believers are supposed to pursue that results in some sort of vision or outcome for society that aligns with divine will, essentially. So then it links to this idea, which is an important idea of what our collective vision is. And I think that's what I've spent quite a lot of time in recent weeks and months just writing and speaking more about, is I challenge believers generally, as well, especially those in leadership positions, and maybe I'll challenge you with this as well, which is to think about, like, collectively speaking, what actually is the net result of all of our efforts? What actually we're trying to achieve, and where we can all find our, or a simple way to put it is, what is the picture that represents the end outcome in the context of which we are all individual puzzle pieces, or our work represents. There's different puzzle pieces. So that's, in terms of the goal. For me, I think, the best thing I can do, I think, is to orient as many people as possible around this way of thinking, in terms of getting them to think about what is meaningful work, what matters to God, what matters to them, what matters to society, trying to get some coherence and alignment in all of these things. So I'm trying to be, a sort of a mental change maker behind the change makers. Try to affect their mindset and orient them the right way, hopefully.
Makes sense. But I know you, so I kind of know what that means.
Okay.
But practically, what does that mean for, Kabzi sat there behind the camera.
Yeah.
He's a videographer. How does that manifest in his life?
So for Kabzi, what that means is if Kabzi was asked, what's his actual name? Kabir, yeah. Kabir, the great one. If the great one was asked, oh great one, if you knew for a fact that, for example, we're mid-November now, right? So if you knew for a fact that at the end of December, that was it, December 31st, all right, life is over. Angel of death comes, there's some unfortunate or unexpected incidents that results in Kabzi's beautiful soul flying up into the heavens. The question then is that
to the real great one.
Indeed, yeah, to the Akbar, Kabir to the Akbar.
Yeah, exactly.
So if he knew that today, how would he feel? Meaning, how would he then feel about what he's up to in his life, the way in which he's investing his time and energy? So practically, I think this is a great way to cut to the chase in terms of saying, getting someone to think about, are they at any one point in time working on the most meaningful thing that they think they can possibly be working on and towards, which is exactly aligned with, or as well aligned with their impending meeting, with their Lord, essentially. And that's where the last day component of last day leadership comes in. The idea is not just any kind of leadership; it's leadership that is governed by two last days. Your last day in this life, so you have a sense of urgency about the fact that time's not on your side. So you need to make decisions which are in line with that, but also your last day in the next life, which then is a period of accountability, which then gives a sense of focus to what is it that I'm actually directing myself towards. So now, if his answer is actually, at least as far as the main, I imagine that obviously the work that he's doing here, and the work that all of you are doing here in the team, and typically people's jobs, or typically ends up being the thing that defines them, the means by which they identify themselves in conversation, in interactions, the thing that consumes most of their time, energy, attention, etc. The question is that, are we directing all of that energy, time, attention in such a way that we feel aligns with our highest purpose? Because there is, I find, a big incoherence oftentimes for a lot of people in terms of we affirm certain things in our worldview, but I'm not sure the implications of all of that actually filters down into people's decision about, well, one of the most important decisions, which is, what are you actually spending your life doing? So I think practically at an individual level, that's what it means. Another good way to look at it is to say to somebody, like, if money wasn't an issue for you, meaning that you had some independent source of income that was covering your whatever you needed to get through life in a sort of even a minimally comfortable kind of level, then again, would you then change what you're doing right now? So for a lot of people who are caught up in corporate work, generally speaking, most of them, if they could get an independent source of income that wasn't that work, then they would probably change the work that they're up to. So then it also gets them to think about, well, what the extent to which finances are a motivation, and the extent to which, like, the inherent purpose is a motivation for the work that they're doing. So I want people to be, not just I think it's in our individual and collective best interest for us all to be finding that optimal place or state. And it's iterative, obviously, but at any one time we should at least be thinking, like, this is the best that I can be doing, this is the best sort of offering that I can give, essentially.
But what if, don't you need a certain amount of basic knowledge to be able to guide that? Because
who, me or them?
Them.
Okay.
Each individual.
Knowledge about what?
About, I guess, Islam and about their purpose generally. Because what they might do is they might say, actually, you know what? If I'm going to die in December, I'm going to quit. I'm going to fast pretty much Mondays and Thursdays at least.
Yeah.
Do lots of the Hajj, get everyone to forgive me, and spend time with my family.
Okay. Well, that's interesting, because first of all, there's two things I would say in response to that. Number one is, when I said that, I didn't say, what will he now do in the 6 weeks that remain?
Yeah.
Well, that's a separate question.
Yeah.
Right? I did say, what would he make of what he has been up to so far?
Yeah.
Right? So it's interesting, because actually I would say somebody who is doing the kind of work which they feel is most meaningful to their Lord, that the kind of thing that they would be pursuing for the sake and for the cause of their Lord, regardless of a monetary and other kind of factors, actually would want to spend their last day doing that thing, because that's the thing that they've thought of to be the most meaningful offering. So it's this idea of service as worship, and not just to see our day to day in that way. So not at a deep level, not just at this kind of really at a basic level. People talk about work as worship just from the point of view of earning an income and then the minimum sort of ability to provide and stuff, which is theoretically okay, but for I think that's much truer for people who are on that edge of being able to provide at a minimal level. So there, I think there's almost something more sacred about their effort, essentially. But when it goes to these higher kind of levels, motivations can become, that actually doesn't end up being the motivation for most people. Money becomes the objective, rising up the ranks, etc., whatever other objectives there are. So I'd say that, but I'd also say then in terms of, but it does beg these important questions around the nature of the actual, let's call it more direct, or call it more ritual types of worship, let's say, the extent to which, well, if you would fast more, well, why aren't you just fasting more now? If you would pray more, why aren't you just praying more now? Because again, theoretically, we all affirm this idea of don't be in the morning as if you get to the evening, don't be in the evening as if you'll get to the morning. But now all of a sudden, that, okay, you've got 6 weeks left, and that's changing everything.
Yeah.
But those changes, so it's this idea of, living in the now, essentially, and with this constant awareness, and it's a high state, and I'm not saying I've reached that state at all.
Yeah.
I think a few of us would say that we probably have, but it's a very useful framework through through which to constantly evaluate oneself in what we might call, and I think we box off these things. Again, this is part of the environmental kind of conditioning, right? Like where we kind of box these things like, okay, there's work over here and there's family over here and there's worship over here, and that's useful, obviously, to do at some level, but actually it is about looking at holistically the whole package of the direction in which we're going and where we're pulling towards, and just evaluating that in this context. And I think for most people, if they're honest with themselves, there's either some combination of like cluelessness or discomfort with the status quo. And I think what I'm trying to do is get people to be aware of that, and then encourage them to make decisions, often brave decisions, to try to close the gap between like some theoretical ideal and a practical ideal.
Can you give me like an example of, I don't know, one of your people who've gone through the course, or the people that you're working with at the moment, obviously on a no names basis,
Sure, yeah.
On the that gap that they identified between what they realized that they wanted to be at and where they were at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of examples. I would say broadly speaking, there are kind of two. Most people I work with, I think what ends up happening as a result is that they end up at least starting or initiating a project or something that they has been long in the kind of pipeline or in their thought process, but they've actually now they've taken steps to kind of get going with what they think is their ideal contribution. So essentially, so to put it in contemporary terms, like some sort of side hustle begins, let's say, alongside whatever is occupying them at the moment. So there's many examples of that. Sometimes that might look like, oh, now this person has published a book, or now this person has started some local community service, or a more kind of sophisticated even startup, even tech startup, whatever it might be. So lots of these things have resulted, on people from like sort of these side projects that hopefully for some people becomes the main thing at times. For others, they may or may not be then further down the line in terms of their own journey. But for others, then it's kind of they've already kind of decided that they've got to the sufficient level of frustration with what they're kind of where they are at the moment. They want to make a bigger leap to completely draw a line on whatever they've been up to in the past and now start fresh on a new project or endeavor or direction. And then in those cases, it's more just, again, that support and encouragement, and sometimes down to some practicalities, especially in the context of like funding and sustainability, to help a person then move to the next level and make that jump with more confidence. So broadly speaking, like these are the kinds of categories. And there's one other, I suppose, which is the earlier stage. So just recently, I've been doing more with like undergraduate students, and it's interesting. Like I was doing I did a full day with some undergraduate students at the beginning of this month, and towards the end of the day, one person asked, he said, well, I think so many of us are already really conditioned into certain patterns of thinking about what constitutes success and what decisions to make around what job to get or career paths and all this kind of stuff. And then he was like, how can we shake ourselves out of this? And I said, well, that's what I've been trying to do all day, right? Is to sort of undo all of these things. But it's interesting that someone observed at that relatively young age, that there is so much around, obviously the structures of education and everything else, and just the society that we're in, the extent to which it is actually informing our decision making and, let's say, guiding us more than necessarily God is guiding us, let's say, or that we're allowing Him to guide us, through our understanding of ourselves. You said, do people need basic knowledge to answer these questions? I actually think most of that knowledge is already inside us anyway. I think there's something around this process simply being a decluttering process to find the real you, which is in line with your sort of innate qualities and your specifically sort of divine design, let's say, and a lot of it is just freeing yourself from all of the layers that you have just allowed to accumulate, essentially. So yeah, I think it's not easy, because I think it is simply an unlearning process, and then a reorienting process.
So is it fair to say that, because I think you mentioned a few things about how people are doing community projects and doing a bunch of other things. is it that is Iqbal Nasim anti like work, like anti someone just being, I don't know, like an engineer or a dentist or whatever?
No, I'm not anti-work. I'm not obviously I'm not anti-work in terms. I don't think you mean anti-work. I think you mean anti like defined job.
Non-Islamic or like non kind
No,
of
yeah.
direct
Well, I
impact.
don't use this word. I know it's difficult for someone from Islamic finance guru to hear, but I don't really approve of the adjective Islamic.
Yeah.
I don't. I think it's. I never use it, to be honest with you, and I frown at things that that basically. I think it's like we use this adjective, but it's actually. The adjective actually has no place in the Quran or any prophetic narration. There's no such adjective Islami to describe anything. So it's interesting why do we, so
Yeah.
what are we doing when we're using that? What exactly are we saying? Anyway, so maybe we can get onto that maybe. But the point being is that I don't think there's a Islamic, non-Islamic in that sense. I don't look at it like that. I just look at it from, like I said, from the point of view of the individual. It's not a judgment of the outward. Someone can be an investment banker, they can be a lawyer, engineer, doctor, teacher, whatever they are. Just because someone is a scholar or an imam or whoever doesn't make them more aligned in respect to what I'm saying than somebody who is doing any of these kind of, let's call standard roles, let's say. I think the issue is not what they're doing, but how they got there,
Yeah.
right? So what's driving that decision? What's governing that kind of process? I think, but that's something which we all know generically to be true anyway. We understand that we are accountable for our intentions and actions and the extent to which we, and also I would say the difference between like where I'm, like I think what we're discussing generally is not so much the difference between good and bad, but between good and great. Meaning like, someone can lead what I would call like, a lawful, acceptable
Blameless life, yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly. Although even that's debatable because there's an extent to which if you look at it from the point of view of the rights and wrongs of what someone does or doesn't do, that's one thing. If you look at it from the point of view of things that you could have done that you should have done in God's eyes, but you never set out to do, you could argue that is blameworthy too. And there's much Quranic evidence to suggest that there is a level of accountability for things that we didn't do but we could have done. Right, and aspirations that we didn't meet that we could have aspired to because we were too caught up in whatever. So I think it's beneath the layers of the outward presentation. So actually, someone at the end of all of this process, could be a very successful like VC guy, could be a very successful, whatever founder or whatever. Like, are they? I just all the bluff and all the stuff gets removed when someone simply asks themselves that question, like. Again, if that last day came, then could I confidently justify my direction, my actions to my Lord? It really comes down to that. Yeah, was this the best that I could do, given what I knew about you and given what I knew about what you wanted from us? I think the part that is really, really missing, and I mentioned it before, maybe we can talk about it a bit, and maybe you can give me your view on it as well. The part that's really, I feel, is desperately missing from all of our kind of let's say efforts. So whether people talk about the mosques, talk about various organizations doing different things, I think we don't the binding collective vision isn't there.
What should it be?
You tell me. What do you, I mean, you're running this thing, IFG, curate, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, what's the bigger picture? So if that's one puzzle, or if you're taking responsibility for one aspect of an overall societal vision,
yeah.
Right. Well, what do you think? What do you see?
So I think there's different. I think of it in like different like taxonomies or different threads to what makes up human existence, and I think of it as you've got the political, you've got economic, you've got I guess spiritual, you've got cultural, academic stuff. I would say those are probably the main threads in my head, and I think in each of those the thing that they are governing. In politics, it's the public sphere, and in economics, it's money and finances and transactions. Spirituality is at some level, I guess, the heart, and culture, academia, and education is kind of the mind and thoughts around that. And I think in all of those, you want to try and incline that thing that you're, the core thing that you're trying to influence. Or that thread is about towards what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. And if you can achieve that in all of those spheres, then I guess the idea would be that you create a world where His will is manifest in and around us.
So what's the one sentence version of what that society is?
What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
but in a way that anyone can understand. Because because if we just say what he wants, it's just okay. What we want is what he wants, but okay, what does he want?
I think it would be like a just, harmonious society that's good for us, and that allows us to, get back to him or get back to Jannah in as efficient a manner as possible.
Okay. So I would say, like, the best one sentence version that I've come up with on this is something like, in the context of Britain, let's say, like a prosperous and harmonious Britain that's built on a foundation of monotheism, right? Just to keep it at an earthly level. So in this, what we are doing is we are simultaneously capturing the faith component in very, very simple and clear terms, as well as some reference to the like the kind of the look and feel of this society, essentially. Right?
What is it? Prosperous and harmonious Britain?
Yeah, built on a foundation of monotheism.
Right.
So the idea is that there's a kind of that there would be a shared commitment to one God, essentially, and driven by that, inspired by that, guided by that, there would be this commitment to build this sense of an ideal society. And I think prosperity and harmony are the two kind of if I was just looking for two words, like the best combination of words in my view that I've come up with. I know there's people like to use justice and these kinds of things, but I feel that's captured within this. I think if it's harmonious and prosperous, it's likely to be just, and I think it's a bit more positive. There's something a bit angsty about the justice stuff, especially when we talk about it. Anyway, and both of them, the thing I like about these words also is that they work on an individual and collective level, and on a metaphysical as well as a material level, both in terms of prosperity and harmony. Now, the thing is about this thing is that, what I would say though is that I think very few, say, leaders from within our community would dispute that this is something worth working towards. But I don't think they would also think that they're actually working towards that thing consciously. Yeah. Number one, this statement of a vision is by definition universal. And one of the biggest problems that we have is our very, very insular nature. So when we are thinking about the future, we think in very insular terms. We think about what does the Muslim community look like in the future. We don't think about what society looks like in the future, right? And there's a massive difference. Even to give an example, at a mosque level, for example, if there is a board of a mosque, an imam, an organizing committee, whatever, who have a very a thought out vision for their local community, right, say in 20, 30, 40 years time, like that vision would be heavily limited if it didn't include a vision for the entire locality, right? Now, I would say that if in 30, 40 years time, the kind of ethnic and demographic makeup of the attendees of that mosque is similar to what it is today, and it's just the children and grandchildren of the same people that are coming there today on a Friday, then to me there's success in one sense, in the sense that there's continuation, but there's also failure in the sense there's no breadth. And there's this funny kind of observation I've had recently, which is like when it comes to this diversity stuff, right? Which is that we're always complaining about the extent to which we're not represented in wider society in various positions. But we have no issue with the fact that wider society isn't represented within our community, right? Because in most areas, in most localities, the reality is that if we have been successful at this local kind of level, and people have found the value of this faith, then all of a sudden, you're going to have like 20, 30, 40, 50% of your congregation being, white, English, right?
Black, brown.
Oh yeah, no, but yes, black, brown too. But I'm just saying that proportion would rapidly
I get it.
would be a significant increase. Obviously, it depends on where you are. But
Lewisham is a fantastic example of this. Lewisham Islamic Centre.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go on their social media, like they've got da'wah, they've got shahadas going on left, right, and centre.
Sure, yeah.
And and I think there's very few masajid like that where it feels like actually this is now part of Lewisham.
Yes.
And it's a reflection of Lewisham.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I've heard lots of good things, and I've seen some stuff about what they're doing, and it seems very relatively, I'm maybe mistaken in this, but it seems like it's relatively like youth focused as well.
Yeah.
In terms of that, and that's fine. But what we want to be able to do is we want to I really think this idea is interesting of the extent to which we can represent society within our community, not just the extent to which we as a community are represented in society, because that will really get us to think about not just ethnic differences, but also demographic, also for want of a better word, class differences, if you want to say, right? You want to be bringing in proportionally like relevant people from all sorts, or whoever's open. Now, what this requires, first of all, it requires us to have a universal mindset. Now, the powerful thing about this is that even though it goes against our contemporary thinking, it's entirely in line with everything that we say we believe, right? The messenger is a messenger for all people. God is God of all human beings, not just God of those who believe in Him.
Pakistanis.
Yeah, exactly.
From Karachi.
Precisely. And none of us have the right, of course, to write off the possibility of faith for any individual. And in fact, it would help. It's actually I believe it's a much more helpful way to see ourselves than to see ourselves as, not to see Muslim and non-Muslim. Again, non-Muslim, another term which I don't like because I don't think it's a non-Quranic kind of term, non-prophetic term. There is no ghayr Muslim that's as a reference point. In fact, when we use non-Muslim, that's a word to define another person relative to us. Whereas all the Quranic terms about who people are and their states are all relative to God, right? So you either deny God, you believe in Him, right? You are either associate partners with Him. Right? It's all about what you're doing relative to Him. Yeah. But then you also know as well is that that all of us as Muslims, capital M, are also subject to the possibility of manifesting all of these hypocrisies, associations, even elements of denial and disbelief. So they're states. So if you understand them as states, right, and on a spectrum, as opposed to fixed social political groupings, you know, I think that's healthier for an individual to see it that way, because then you know that your Muslim name, quote unquote, whatever that means, and your Muslim title isn't going to save you. It's your reality at the end of the day. Similarly, all of a sudden non-Muslims become not yet Muslims as well, right? They just happen to be over there on the spectrum, but there's a way to bring them in. So now what we realize is the responsibility is to manifest the value proposition of this faith, right? Like universally. And that is what should be then governing, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, the work you do in this finance and economic space, the work a mosque does in its community kind of service, the work some youth group does, whatever. The narrative of whoever you are, wherever you are, and even if you are one of these individuals who is now a civil servant, engineer, lawyer, banker, whatever you are, I think you can basically 10x the value of what you're actually doing in your life by understanding your role and your place as part of this collective universal vision. Because frankly, everybody needs to get it, from the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, to whoever. Everyone needs to understand this. So with this, whether it's the simple-minded, believer who just goes along with things, or people who are more thinkers, scholars, academics, or it's people who are business people, wealthy individuals, the whole mix of everyone. Like if we all understood, just as all of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, some of them very obscure, we don't even know who they were, frankly speaking, and some of them more obviously well known. Some of them sinners, some of them complete winners, right? The whole lot of them, the whole mix. Yeah. But wherever they were, they knew what they were part of. They knew what this mission was about, and they knew that they knew that the end point, or the desirable end point, was that monotheism would spread and would build a prosperous, harmonious, just, whatever you want to call it, society. So at least they knew that they were part of this collective thing. Whereas I don't think we have this collective awareness.
You sound a bit Ikhwani.
Well, I don't believe in all of these, the need to use all of these labels.
Sure.
So whatever that means to you, I'm happy that gives you a reference point. Okay, it's not relevant to me. Yeah. And unfortunately, no one has ever or will ever successfully manage to sort of box me or label me in this or that way. I think I'm just trying to look at what does this, in a weird way, I think, not in a weird way, but I think in a way that's counter to our, it's like, it's counter to our sort of contemporary thinking. It's like we need to almost be like, combine our sense of belonging to Britain, right, and deepen that from a, because you say that to the average Muslim now, they'll think you're saying,
assimilate.
Yeah. It's like very taken in a very negative way, that you kind of say, like, you almost as if it's a campaign to get people to submit to the white man or something like this, right? It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with actually, no, God has put you on a certain place on earth. It's all God's earth, right? To Him belongs the East and West. Okay, so again, this whole Western, the Western world, Muslim world, all of these lines of division, to me, they just really don't really mean anything. I think we hear the seeds of faith have been sown, right, and there is a massive opportunity for us to like take responsibility for the future of this country, essentially, as his God stewards on this earth, as his ambassadors, as his agents of positive change, to demonstrate this value proposition. And that means that we need to then think about how we use language, how we present ourselves, how we offer our products and services. Are we unnecessarily constraining what we're doing as Muslim products to Muslim consumers? Why? If we're doing that, why are we doing that? Are we really operating in a way that's like eyes open to the context when it comes to, when it comes to saying and doing whatever we say and do? And are we sort of losing sleep over what this and communicating the potential of this vision? Because I would say, like, even for someone like yourself, I think you have a role in a particular area, but I feel that as one of the leaders in this kind of space, that you have a responsibility to then communicate as part and parcel of the work that you do, not just the individual products and services, and you can invest in, curate and this and that. Okay, that's all nice, but to me, that's all part of the kind of the details, right? But at a high level, are you communicating, like, where's this all taking us? So then what, not just down to the individual consumer, this is the benefit for you if you invest in this product, but collectively speaking, we are bringing a certain value here, an opportunity for people, right? And that there is something that transcends these kind of, that again, anybody could get involved with. I really think this is a huge thing where what we have to offer should be made as universally available and relevant as possible. That's I think critical.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a good point to dive in on the finance side of things and this ecosystem, because you've been making some observations on it, shall we say, over recent weeks and months. But like the way I think about where IFG and Curate fits in is, I think it's all of this is like messy and imperfect, but how I think about it is, we started 2015, 2016. We didn't really particularly think about the name. We just looked for something that was available at the time.
Yeah.
And where we are today, we've got Islamic Finance Guru, IFG, which caters for really the Muslim audience. And they seem to like it and benefit from it. And then we've got Curate Capital, which is much more neutral, and that's the investment arm. And that's actually where I guess the business focus is. And if I kind of project forwards, ultimately I would love to, like, everything that we're doing here is kind of a setup phase. Like the ultimate end goal, I think, needs to be a much more just, or much more, I think when we're talking about finance, I think it does come back to a lot of equitable and just kind of stuff, economy as a whole. And the economy needs to be helping people and serve people, so that it, and that's not necessarily a Muslim thing. That's just that we're doing useful stuff for society thing.
But that's why I don't think there needs to be something called Islamic finance.
We'll get to that in a second. Right. So where I see kind of my role, or IFG or Curate, this business's role, is the first thing is we just need to stabilize and get to a place where...
When is that happening, by the way? Because we've been waiting for this for a few years.
Hopefully this year, inshallah.
Okay, you're stabilizing.
We're getting there.
2024? Okay, fine.
There you go. Maybe 2025. But anyway, we'll get there, inshallah.
You're stabilizing, all right.
And at that point, I think it starts making a lot more sense where because obviously this is ultimately a commercial venture as well, so you've got to balance both those sides out. But using this to solve economic problems for all of society, and then and so in a way, as an investment firm, we're already doing half of the problem, which is we take money in from one side, we only take it in from Muslims right now, and then we give it out to lots of people, Muslims and non-Muslims. So the two-sidedness of it will ultimately, we'll start going out to non-Muslims as well, non-Muslims, whatever you want to call them, right? And I think
not yet Muslims. You can use that now.
What's that?
Not yet Muslims.
Not yet Muslims.
I'm popularizing this term.
Exactly. Not yet Curate investors. So we'll go out to them, and I think that's a strategic question of you can't go out after multiple people at the same time. But regardless, I think the end goal needs to be that you're showing that there is a more ethical way of doing investment and flowing money back into this country as well, right? That's the other key thing where, forget the Islamic side of it. What we're doing as a country is we're just giving up all of our wealth over to the USA. Pretty much most countries in the world are doing that right now because of the US dollar, but also because the S&P and the US stock market is by far the largest. And that, I think, is a broken global system, financial system. So at some level, we're going to have to, start discoursing on that. But to go after that, which I think is the real kind of, evil, is like we're just not big enough. So you kind of have to get to that level where, you've got significant AUMs under your belt. You've got, significant stuff going on in terms of investments.
But you mean in terms of being like a policy impacting voice, you're saying?
And then you can start having, at this point, we're not relevant for the Bank of England. But once we become, a significant firm, there's actually like a definition, which is like where you've got to the size where you are actually a significant firm.
Sure.
And that's where they will be really focused on you generally from a regulatory perspective. But also by the same token, you can have that conversation with the policymakers. And I think you need to get the ear of not just one policymaker, but probably multiple policymakers globally for them to take the risk to start making the very fundamental changes they need to make in order to start, carving out a space for a non-interest-based system or like a non-fundamentally interest-based system. And I think that kind of then, percolates through. And in the meantime, you just make sure that, the profits that you are making, you're putting it into, other projects and other initiatives that kind of, that is our responsibility as the financiers of the community to make sure that we're facilitating.
No, sure, but in between this kind of, in between the kind of product service provision over here and the high level kind of policy impacting thing over there is a bit in between which you probably are already positioned to do to a certain degree in a universal way, which is the educational bit, right? I.e., a lot of this stuff, even at a high level, only takes place to the extent to which there is public support or understanding of certain things. So whether it's yourself or any of these other sort of Muslim fintech companies or individuals who are prominent in this area, I think what hasn't been laid out clearly enough is in such a way that John and Sally and whoever can understand, right? What's the issue here? What is the issue in the financial system, and what exactly are we saying should be the case otherwise? And also, if there is, because I think the key thing to understand is that if whatever we consider to be lawful or unlawful as far as financial dealings and transactions are concerned, they are lawful and they are either lawful or unlawful, not just because of some arbitrary test of our obedience, but because they actually they carry a real value, or there is a real significance to how that actually impacts life on earth for human beings and impacts on human flourishing. So that should be a universally communicable idea that we should be able to then explain that to anybody and everyone. But what we end up doing instead is, we don't take up that opportunity. Even for our own, we have this generic. We basically take it on assumption as to what everyone understands why riba is a problem or whatever it is. But I don't think most people do understand, which is why actually in most in any data that I've become aware of that even companies have, or surveys that people have companies that have done. Which is why individuals go and, most people within our community for their financial transactions and house purchasing and whatever else, they go conventional routes anyway, because there isn't this understanding. So there's not this understanding generally, there's not understanding internally, because I think we're kind of, we're talking to people at a level of jargon and at the level of simply like just on the assumption that they already understand why something is allowed or not allowed. But we just, in plain English, need to, why can't the various products and services just be offered as all other financial products and services are offered in a universally available way?
Yeah.
But just informed by whatever our ethics and values and rules and restrictions and laws are, whatever. Because I know there's lots of debatable things amongst there, but any one company decides on that and just puts it out, and in plain English explains why this is now a benefit to anyone and everyone. And I can't understand why. Other than just to perpetuate this thing of like, this is the specific target market they're going at, and here's a target market who understands that when the word riba is put in front of them, like it clicks off an alarm bell, and now that's the one we're looking for. Yeah. I understand that at one level, but it's too basic, and it then doesn't make any headway into this broader kind of picture that we're talking about.
So I think
Because remember, sorry, just
yeah,
to
yeah,
really emphasize it, to put it back into the context that we were saying, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the general public to understand the value proposition of submission to God. And if part of submission to God is like adherence to certain, say, prescriptions, regulations, rules, or whatever, which are in the interest of, in this context, our economic and financial well-being, sustainability, balanced economy, what have you, then we should be able to, like, if people could connect that kind of value-added offering explanation with that, and that it's coming from it's coming from this kind of a faith. Yeah, it's coming from a faith. It's coming from within a faith-informed context that is emphasizing the importance of, balance, demonstrates relevance, contextual awareness, and then paves the way forward. That's something to get excited about, I think.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I don't know. We're drawn a circle, playing our own little games over here, and then
Yeah.
it's, well, what's that achieving?
So another thought experiment here could be that what would the Prophet or what would the Sahaba do if they Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, right? I can imagine he'd probably be a businessman in this era as well.
Sure.
And I suspect that they wouldn't do anything particularly dramatic. I think they would just do business, but in a very ethical, upright way.
That's different. That's a different example, though. That's in terms of an individual believer just running whatever business.
Yeah.
Fine. We've got tons of those examples, and that's fine. I'm talking in terms of, in your context, it's a bit different because it's not just running a business, providing these, you're providing a particular kind of service.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to say that investing or doing things in a particular way the level at which it's done right now, it allows you as a believer to just adhere to the rules essentially within this kind of messy context.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that's a very different example from the example of so-and-so believer businessman who's just going to run whatever business they're doing.
So I'm kind of using, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, I don't know how reliable these narrations are, but towards the end of his life, he was doing a lot of financing for other businesses, giving donations to other people. And it was kind of most of business Medina was in some kind of relationship with him.
Fine.
And I suspect that because of this key conduit being someone of influence on someone who was good, that was percolating through that entire ecosystem. So my thought process is that actually probably even more powerful than taking people's money is giving people money.
Sure.
And the awareness that brings of, oh wow, okay, that's really interesting that they do things in this particular way, and perhaps we should be improving on that because frankly we don't. And I think we communicate the law of it, but we don't necessarily do the da'wah of it properly. Perhaps we should improve on that. But I think if you can just do this bit well, taking people's money, grow that and give that out well, and you're just growing that pot, there'll just be a lot of da'wah and a lot of acceptance or a lot of pull towards this pot of money. Think of the Middle East, right? It's a honeypot, and everyone's going after Middle Eastern money. It's another problem about whether or not they are the perfect epitome of Islam right now. Fine, but if they were, I suspect that would have an influence. So yeah, I'm kind of I'm just thinking aloud here. Yeah. But that's one way potentially to think about it.
No, sure. There's different components. I think the most important thing for all of this is that if there's any operator in this space, they should think or frankly, anybody who's operating an organization with this particular brand, that a person should not underestimate to which the brand becomes a little mini god essentially. That ends up governing decision making in such a way that sometimes can be at odds with what the let's say the God-centered vision that transcends their particular brand actually is. So it's very convenient for everyone to justify their little pathways and the things that they're up to on the basis of this is what we as XYZ company stand for and this is what we do. But I'm saying we all have, once you remove the labels and the brands and everything else, you think about it in more existential terms, in the way, going back to the beginning, in terms of the way in which we are actually contributing to the success of God's cause on this earth, and in our context here, that are we moving towards this ideal society that aligns with divine will in Britain, for example, right? Then everybody just needs to be constantly thinking about, if I was to run my organization, company, whatever, in a way that aligned better with some sense of this overarching vision, then what would I do and change? And some of those things will be change of products and services, universalization, linguistic changes in terms of like how you say things so that anyone can understand, because a lot of what we say and do, right? We insert like bits of jargon or Arabic terms and phrases, frankly, most of the time, if not all the time, completely unnecessarily. Like, why don't we just keep it so that we know what we're actually talking about, right? And anybody could know what we're talking about. This is key. And it's not a small point, because actually, again, this is something that comes back straight to, even this issue is emphasized in the Quran as an issue, because, of course, the use of Arabic is emphasized in the Quran on the basis that the initial recipients of revelation were Arab, right? So even they would, and then even there's one part of one verse where Allah says that if it was in a foreign language, then they would say, well, its verses haven't been made clear, right? So it's like so he's making the argument that if we had done that, right, then you would have said it's not clear to you, and then we've sent it down as an Arabic revelation so that you understand. It is the job then of anyone who's trying to represent that message. If we are in English, whether we like it or not, we're in an English-speaking society, everything should be in plain English, clearly understandable and easily available to anyone and everyone. I just, like, there's no, why not?
Yeah.
And then in terms of how we present ourselves, I think anything that presents us as, foreign, alien, not understandable, any of this stuff, it compromises this overall vision.
Yeah. So I agree with. I think this is a question of tactics at heart, because my view is that, in principle, I agree. Like we should get to that universal level, but from a business perspective, you just can't boil an ocean. Forget even just any organizational perspective. You have to speak to the person in front of you, and you can have a universal tone to the message.
Yeah, but if you only open the door to certain people and then you say, I want to speak to the person in front of me, that's one different thing. If you open the door to everyone and then you say, for example, in the mosque example, which is an easier way to understand this, right? If you say, well, I'm speaking to the people in front of me and they happen to be like Muslims and they're part of our community, whatever, so I'm speaking to them in a way that they will understand, right? Well, firstly, yes, but that's because you didn't bring others in the first place. Others didn't know that they could come in the first, right? Yeah. And then secondly, also, even if you are having Muslims here, still, they, in their day-to-day lives outside of this mosque, they're interacting with all sorts of different ways. If you communicate to them in a way that's like the language of this space, but it's completely like they can't actually relate that to ways of thinking that align with just their general way of thinking in life and in line with the other content that they consume and like their interactions at work and with neighbors and whoever, then this is where a lot of our cognitive dissonance stuff comes in, where we're not applying the same kind of thought process, rationale, understanding, narrative in our quote-unquote religious lives, right, as we are in the rest of our lives. But all of that needs to be all integrated. And
I guess another manifestation of this is politics, right? Where, as a Muslim community, I think I've not actually watched the video, but you did this like Islamophobia. Yeah. I've not watched the video. I was like, oh, that's an interesting word. I feel like I know what he's going to say.
There you go.
And I kind of get that. I kind of get that the overall tone of it and the overall discourse needs to be much more universal.
Actually, I would say it go as far as it needs to be flipped on its head. Actually, the whole thing. Like, I just think the starting point in our mindset of how we are conceiving of ourselves, collectively, and conceiving of our place and our kind of duty and responsibility, like in this country, that the whole starting point, I think, is wrong. To be honest, so that's why then everything that flows from that goes off in a different direction. Like, whereas if the starting point, the starting point is typically something like, we're a minority, we believe these certain things, other people don't believe them. We've kind of, subconsciously written off the possibility of, like, I don't think most Muslims in this country believe Islam as a phenomenon like almost can or should go beyond our community. Like I don't think they're consciously thinking about it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
right?
that's
They're
fair.
just kind of just living it on a day-to-day basis, and they are who they are, we are who we are, and like and that's kind of we're doing. Ironically, it's a highly the way in which we think of it all is very much aligned with the sort of secular paradigm, which is to keep your faith at home, essentially,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And then yes, but then we bring our faith into the politics and everything else in a way that's not actually doesn't come across as deeply rooted in faith. It's just it's more as a kind of identity politics, right? An ethnic or cultural representation, and then typically aligned with certain issues like Palestine and say this Islamophobia, exactly, and these other things. And then so we only get involved in anything to the extent that we see it as this is in our either community's interest locally or globally. But we do not have, like, that shouldn't even be, in my opinion, I don't think that should even be the starting point. The starting point should be what's in society's best interest as far as A, B, C, D, E, F, G topics are concerned. If you do that, you necessarily will take care of your own dramas as part and parcel of that bigger picture. Also, you'll represent your own concerns in a way that is a bit more balanced, possibly even in a way that's likely to be more successful. Because when in any relationship, when you demonstrate a genuine concern for the other person or group of people, as simultaneously alongside trying to get your own concerns represented, the chances are you'll have more luck in getting more success in getting your qualms and issues heard, right? Whereas if we're only always banging the door when there's some need that we have that we don't have fulfilled.
But isn't there so I hear the argument that look, we need to be much more outward facing. We are part of this, we are part of this community, and we need to be much more focused on that. Fine, and having much more of a, I guess, like a da'wah mindset. We need to convey this truth.
You can just say just much more inviting mindset.
Inviting mindset, fine. Okay, so but then I feel like there is also innate within humanity this idea of groups. We're a tribal people.
Yeah.
وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً
Sure. We're a team.
Yeah. So there's and so I think and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about various different aspects of how we should be united, right, as a community.
That's fine. But nothing I've said compromises that.
Yeah. So al-Muslimuna ka jasadin wahid, all Muslims are like one body, etc., etc. So you've got all these, like, I guess, group type things going on as well. And
you are a group, but what unites you, actually, what's supposed to unite you is your shared commitment to this vision, right? So all the various descriptions of believers who are a famous one in Surah At-Tawbah, for example, right? وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ, right? That believing men and women are supporters, friends, allies of one another. But then what do? يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. They go and promote the good and prevent wrongdoing and evil taking place. So it's so you are united in the context of your public, not just in the kind of what we believe and what we sort of our kind of collective ritual practice, but in terms of like as a positive force for good in society. Right? And elsewhere, descriptions of believers in the context of their striving for the cause, sacrificing. So we are a team. That's not on debate here, of course. The issue is that what are we trying to achieve as a team? Yeah. And if what we're trying to achieve as a team is that our team is well looked after, that's too myopic, essentially.
100% agreed with that. But what I'm saying is that I feel like what we shouldn't do is go so far in the other direction where we're saying, look, effectively, there is no team, or like there is no groupness to it, because I feel like
there is groupness to it. 100%.
Whenever you've got a collective or a tribe or a group, naturally, in order for it to work, you have these kind of micro cultures that develop, and Islam has like these various different micro cultures as well, I guess, right? And they all kind of manifest in different ways, and I think that the mistake that sometimes, I guess the Wahhabi trend or certain trends have made is they want it to be like a monochrome thing where you suck out the culture from it, and ironically you create another culture in its stead. Sure. So long way of saying is that I think that, let's say in the political space, I very much think that we have gone so far in the we are just going to look after this group mindset, and these are the things that we really care about. So I think your critique is completely bang on there, absolutely. But I don't think we should go so far as to say that these issues, whatever, and I'm not saying that Palestine is.
We're not saying that they're not. Yeah, but no one's saying that they're not issues.
Yeah.
And you know what? I always find this is the case. It's like the classic response to any. So there's a status quo. Then someone who suggests that the status quo needs to change, and the classic response is to like as if the suggestion is to go over here, far on this side. But who said that? No one said that.
Yeah.
I didn't say that in any of this time we're speaking, right? I haven't, right? All I've said is that it is like actually it is to take a balanced view, and it's actually to say that if you take a universal view, by definition, you're going to take care of your internal concerns, right? Simultaneously. But the way in which you do it ends up changing, or ends up, and is likely, I think, to lead to more success. So I think the point about what I'm actually trying to say here is that even if, and I would say this on the Palestine issue, I'd say this on this like British Muslim community concerns, whatever. Actually, if you take a long-term view, if you want the best outcome for Palestine in 100 years' time, you want the best outcome for the Muslim community in Britain in 100 years' time, then you would reorient yourselves in the way that I'm suggesting, I think.
Yeah.
Because if you want your great-grandchildren not to have to be dealing with a similar, issue as far as Palestine is concerned, down the line, then actually this is the view that you need to take, i.e., the best thing that you can do in the long run is to convince as many people in this country that there is a particular overall worldview, an ethic, a moral kind of standard, which is in their individual best interest to adhere to and to be part of, essentially, right? To facilitate the straight path for as many people as possible, because that inspires not the way just that they think about themselves and the individual connection with God, but it also inspires, just like it does for us, the way in which we see all of these other different issues. So if you want to get as many people as possible around you to see ethical issues in relation to things like, and geopolitical issues in relation to things like, Israel-Palestine, or any of these other types of issues that there might be around, whether it's to do with the economics, the problems of an interest-based economic system, and on all sorts of other issues, then we know that you have got to, the more people you can convince to think like us, essentially, or in broad terms, the better in the long run.
Yeah.
Right? So, whereas if we are still just a 5% minority in 100 years' time, right, then, and in my prediction actually is that it will be, either we're going to go to 50% or we're going to go close down to zero. That's what I think. It's going to be, it will be one or the other. I don't think actually we'll just hang around in this sort of middle thing. I think eventually it will have to, it's going to either take off or it's going to peter out. Like I'm talking in substance terms. But that's the best way to go about it. Actually, like surely the long run approach to dealing with like anti-Muslim prejudice, hatred, whatever, is not to bang on about Islamophobia all the time. It's to bang on about Islam all the time. There's a big difference between those two things. It shouldn't be Islamophobia Awareness Month. It should be Islam Awareness Month, right? Actually, or maybe year. Like so. So now it's not reactive. Now you're actually building the context of this positive vision that you can see over there that other people may not be able to see right now. Yes, and then all these the near term, like the near term stresses and strains and scuffles, like you see them for what they are. That you're not minimizing them, but you certainly see them in different contexts when you're thinking about what's the best thing to do today for 50, 100 years down the line.
Yeah.
And I would say to you that look, if there is a version of this society in Britain that in 50, 100 years time is looking like the 40, 50, 60% of the population now believers, I would say, like, whether you think at any level, right, existentially, strategically, politically, economically, whatever way you want to spin or cut it, like, that is something worth working towards, right? So now the question, what do we have to do today for that to happen? And it's not just this simplistic, let's go and do some da'wah. The way I translate da'wah is as I have been. Convey the value proposition of submitting to God, individually, collectively, and as it pertains to all of these different areas. Right? When you do that, people will come in, and that's why they've always ever come in, to be honest, because they saw value in it. right? And you've got to do the God and the good simultaneously. So we do the good out there, we never mention God. We do the God sometimes in sort of like these hypothetical philosophical debates, but then the actual tangible benefit of that also is not communicated. These things need to be brought together simultaneously.
So, so if we've got Iqbal Nasim MP for, I don't know, Rochdale, let's say, tomorrow, what's your game plan? What would you be doing in the political sphere?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know, but I think as an MP in a way, it's like being in the position of an MP. In some ways, you are, and especially actually if you're not in a kind of senior position, right? But you're just a kind of, like most of them are, most of the time constituency MPs that might get involved disproportionately in certain issues here and there. In some ways, you almost are like a community servant, right? On a day-to-day basis, in a way that is quite sort of universal, right? I think for any believing politician at that level, it's not easy to be. How do you be kind of authentic, faithful, as well as potentially, as part and parcel of a party where there's elements of what you there which you're uncomfortable with. But actually, I think it's easier to do, perhaps, because then people think, because actually there's members of parliament from within Labour and within the Conservative Party, like, well, they'll disagree on all sorts of things internally, right? I mean, there's quite big variations in views on all sorts of topics. So it's not necessarily a problem. I think I just wouldn't be, and I think what any Muslim politician should do is, or what they shouldn't do is obviously be, they should be comfortable to articulate the way in which their faith guides their politics, I would say. But to do so in a way where like the outcome is reasonable, I think that, or as reasonably articulated as they can make it. Do you see what I mean? Because everyone has got their guiding whatever philosophies, and whether they know it or not, there's things that are informing their politics and how they're going about things. And so that would be powerful, I think, in terms of Muslim politicians, like being comfortable just to having thought through it and being comfortable articulating the way in which it's guiding their thinking on various issues. But I do think that in the long run, and we've touched on this privately before, you and I do think in the long run, like, it does make sense to me that there might be an alternative, like there would be a party-based political representation of the value proposition that we're talking about here, potentially, right? Which is to say that whilst people from within our community, absolutely get involved in politics, and I don't think actually it's possible to say that. I mean, people thought it was this way once upon a time. I mean, I personally never did really, but it's perfectly possible to be a Muslim Conservative, Muslim Labour Party, Muslim Liberal Democrats, Muslim Green, whatever. But similarly, I think that there might be scope for us to, in the future, if we started to think in this way, to have a party, our own political presence, independently of any of these other parties, that starts to communicate and showcase like what it is that we actually, what's our proposition, essentially. So we should this is the thing, collectively as a community that's guided by what we're guided by. What's our view on immigration? What's our view on the economy, on family, on, on whatever the issues of the day are, right? The economy, budget, cost of living, all of this stuff, foreign policy. We're very good at saying what we don't want. We're not very good at saying what we actually do want. Like, for example, very oftentimes we don't, like, imagining you being in that position in Britain today. Okay, now what would your actual comprehensive foreign policy be? Yeah. In a way that is workable.
But isn't that, I mean, I hear all of that. That and that last point, isn't that a reflection of the adversarial system that we have, where either you're in government or you're in opposition? And if you're in opposition, then your entire job is just to critique until you get into power, and then you say, okay, this is...
No, but I'm saying our approach, I'm saying that we ourselves, as in with our kind of minority mentality sometimes, like we are also in this kind of critique thing. Everyone's good at saying what they don't want. And even, yes, you're right, but you are right, at that level, even until the very last minute, they never actually say what their own policy is. They just pick holes in everything. But if you're doing any of this stuff with any integrity, then you would also be communicating, well, here's what we think. This is what we think should be the case. I'm just saying, as a community, like our own we should be, I think, in a place where we're able to say on these various things what our views are in a way that's informed by our thing. So,
but is it too idealistic?
No, why? Why should it be?
Because
Like why can't we have vehicles and mechanisms by which we have our views on what we... I think immigration is a really interesting one, for example, yeah? There's immigration, and another interesting one is to do with things to do with like, say, I don't know, like health, well-being, substance abuse, these kinds of things, okay? So, all right, like we understand, we believe that within our faith, there is a way of understanding parameters to do with like there's an ethic of how you deal with like foreigners, right? How you deal with the issue of immigration, the kind of approach that we should take to this question, at least in broad terms, okay? Then you've got the real world issue. Then it so happens that a huge number, if not the majority of immigrants into this country are
Muslim.
Right, okay, especially asylum seekers. So you have a mix here of, and it's a very intractable and difficult issue to, as it is anyway. So it's like we at least should have the mechanisms by which we are contributing to that dialogue, to that narrative, right, in a way that's built upon our particular worldview. Similarly with this health and well-being stuff, right? I mean, it's a massive issue. Like, it's obviously being discussed and debated at the moment. There's obviously the assisted dying thing going on. Generally speaking, NHS funding has forever been a problem. The health and well-being, public health is a big issue. Okay, we actually have a lot to say and contribute potentially around like these health and well-being issues, in terms of mental health, right? In terms of health issues that relate from substance abuse.
What would you say on mental health?
No, I'm just saying I'm not saying what the policy is. I'm just saying that okay. For example, like we.
Translate the morning and evening adhkar into English, remove the word Allah, make it God, and be like...
Well, as an example, no, but I'm saying, okay, fine. But like, on a serious point, yeah, like we should be making the case...
And you get like someone who is not yet Muslim to front it, and then you roll that out.
But look, so many people at the moment are talking about the fact, the issue of like at the heart of a lot of people's anxiety, depression, and other issues that are going on at the moment is a sense of loss of meaning, loss of purpose, uncertainty. There are a lot of different factors. Now, it would be again odd and ironic that if we have a lot to say amongst ourselves in our own jargon about how we deal with all of these issues and transcend these things, but we have nothing to say to anyone and everyone else. Yeah. And if saying it to anyone and everyone else, part and parcel of that is to bring the importance of monotheism into the public mental health,
like Alcoholics Anonymous.
Exactly. So why exactly? So why aren't we making that case then?
Yeah.
Right. And Alcoholics Anonymous is a very good example. In fact, I saw
Purposeless Anonymous. Huh? Purposeless Anonymous.
Well, yeah, but even if
Wasteman Anonymous.
But even if it was something specific like this, right? Like, as in, it was a specific. This is a good example of a specific product or service to deal with a specific problem, but to do it through a certain, to do it with a certain ethic, inspired by a certain ethic. Regardless of where because I think our problem is, it's almost like we keep assuming that until somebody believes with all of the basic precepts that we affirm, that they can't experience the value, or they will be too skeptical to experience the value. But actually, I don't think people function like that. I think what they do is that they experience the value, and then as a result, they might be drawn deeper into it. Yeah. In fact, I saw, not so long ago, I saw a YouTube comment in relation to one video I was watching, and somebody wrote something like, that I attended Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and the person said, as part and parcel of the thing, the person said, you should pray as part and parcel of your recovery process, right? And they said, yeah, but I don't believe in God, right? And I don't pray. And then they said, it doesn't matter, just pray anyway, right? Just pray. And then the person said, well, so I started praying, and now I'm like and now I believe, right?
Right.
So our thing is believe then pray.
Yeah.
But actually, maybe there is an argument for pray, and then you actually believe.
Yeah.
I think there's a case for us to universalize almost for example, I think mosques should be inviting people to participate in salah.
Yeah.
Why not? Or at least to observe it.
Yeah.
Right? Not just say, okay, once a day, whatever it's called, visit my mosque day or whatever, but it should be an open invitation at any point in time.
Yeah.
So I just think there's so much scope, in all of these fields and realms for us to be thinking about this. So now I would say, to any, say, young person who's now coming up and thinking about whatever they're thinking about in terms of career and life and whatever, it's like, like, so I know because I see it and I interact with people all the time on this, and you see it all the time, is that, and especially in the last year, because off the back of, everything that's going on in Gaza and everything else, you see, Gaza has provided an impetus for a lot of people to start doing something, anything. I've seen it so many times, individuals and groups, and there's been these meetings of various people, leaders and whatever. Okay, now what do we do? And thinking about different project ideas and all the rest of it. But whilst it's a good thing in a way that it's given a degree of a wake-up call, number one, you should never take an issue like that to bring that wake-up call to, because there's already problems, right? like godlessness in society is your number one problem. So it shouldn't require an international crisis / genocide to wake us up to the fact that now we need to go and do something. So this is already something that should give us enough of an impetus to get on. Number one. Number two is that if that kind, like, whilst that it provides a kind of energy, right, to do something, but it also provides a kind of energy which I think can't be carried over into your strategy, because the net effect of something like this, an event like this, in terms of the Muslim mindset, is actually in some ways to become more defensive, more insular, right? It reinforces a victim mentality, right? So therefore, and that then reflects in, and I've seen it in so many places. Like, I've seen project presentations for all sorts of things where they basically say, like, it's kind of left vague, and it's kind of saying, we need to do this work and we need you to fund this project so say something like what happens in Palestine won't happen in the future. And it's like the project feels so very, like, in terms of what its remit is, so disconnected from this. But you can see how it's not just provided the impetus, but it's almost like the point of doing this thing now is so we can do with that. But that's not, it is a very important concern that needs our attention and needs to be dealt with clearly, but it's not the central objective either. And actually, I would say for Muslims in this country, in Britain, a solution to that issue, or our ability to contribute to that issue, a solution to it would be a byproduct of us successfully pursuing this vision for Britain that we have just been speaking of.
So this is really, ultimately, it's a coordination problem as well, isn't it? Because it's a
leadership problem because...
leadership,
leadership / coordination, because I think...
So what do we do then?
Well, I think that, I can speak about what I can do.
I can give beta to you, and then we can ask the comments. In the comments, they can individual, and if they can like one of the comments, that counts, isn't it?
No, it's not. I would say I believe these things. Absent. I don't think it necessarily needs to be the case, or even should be the case, that we're not talking about someone should be appointed and this person should be followed. I don't think that is the case. But I do think that, for example, that it's about us just starting to act, like, it takes the early movers to represent some of what we have been speaking about in practical terms in their actual work, and to communicate that. This is why we're doing it like this now, because we believe, and to that's why I said to you earlier, is to communicate. Part and parcel of your communication should be the broader vision in the context in which you're doing your work. So your customers should know that, right? Your whoever else that you're doing stuff out should become aware of that. That so the more people who then, like, who live it, who see that broader collective vision as something that they're contributing to, and communicate in relation to it, then that will start to just come into people's consciousness and mindset, and they will understand that this is hopefully like a better way of moving forward. And then it doesn't require. Then it almost becomes naturally coordinated, because now the terms of reference for any conversation between this person leading this organization and that organization are almost automatically aligned. I mean, what I used to find when I was at NZF, for example, is that the terms of reference for these conversations were completely misaligned between, like, if I was to meet with people running different international relief charities or for whatever. It's a great example of what I said earlier, which is that people can't transcend their brand to see what, like, your role is when it comes to how we harness the financial or the charitable kind of pot of believers in this country. How should we harness that? Now let's drop all the brand concerns and the fact that you represent this organization, and forget all of that for a second, right? There's an amount of sadaqah and zakat that's given here, right? There are these various concerns that we might have, locally, globally, whatever. So independent of any one brand, what does this now look like? Most, unfortunately, the reality is most people in these kind of positions, they can't even think like that. Because it is so much about my organization, the color t-shirt that I wear, and my income thing, which for me was like, it was secondary, to be honest. Like, to what's the overall vision here that we're actually trying to get towards. Similarly, I think in this, as far as this whole Islamic finance kind of space is concerned, I just think like there's enough of the players. It's for you and whoever else to kind of like within the space. Can we come up with something which is our, I don't know, like charter, commitment, a collective vision for the economy, for finance in this country that we are that we feel part and parcel of, right? And actually, you could just get all sorts of different organizations, behind. So I think that's what it takes, really. It takes people to adopt it, live it, communicate it, and then it gets out.
What should the charities be doing?
In terms of?
The Islamic charities. What would, does there need to be a shift there? How does this philosophy apply there? Well, because it sounds to me like, if they're on Islam channel, I don't know, is it Islam channel? Okay, anyway, let's say they're on Islam channel and...
what does that need shifting to?
And they are saying, our brothers and sisters are struggling in X location and you need to help your brothers and sisters out, and they're kind of, that's their thing.
Yeah. But this is exactly the point, right? It's great. That's what I said. It's a great example. Everyone can justify their thing in isolation, right? So I can start up a project today. I can choose a village in Bangladesh. I can say that's where I want it. There's people in need there. I can say you're from Bangladesh. Your parents were born in this village. I can draw this line here, and independent of any other factors, I can say this is a good. Yeah. So it's a good thing. So now get on with it, right?
Yeah.
So it's only when you zoom out and you look at the fact that the vast majority of this, of the sadaqah, zakat, and everything else that is being given is going abroad, is dealing with the various welfare issues, whatever. Like they're huge. I mean, I personally think, right, what I find quite bewildering or interesting at least is that there are huge assumptions made about whether or not this balance of using our sadaqah and zakah money is actually even in line with what God wants. How do we know? How do we know that how do we know that actually the very, very fragmented way in which our in charitable giving is done, the scattered way in which it's done, the disproportionate way in which it's invested and done, disproportion locally, internationally is number one, then between poverty and what you might call development or / institution building, between these two things. How do we know that all of these issues are actually major reasons to earn divine disapproval? Right, I would hazard that they are, to be honest, because if it is the case that in God's eyes the prime responsibility of believers in Britain or of Britain is to move towards the end goal. If the end goal again is this vision, right, and we are relatively more responsible for the flourishing of this faith in the societies in which we live, because that's where the influence is, the social capital, cultural capital, etc., the potential, right? You and I, I'm sorry, but you and I are not more responsible for the flourishing of Islam in India, Pakistan, in wherever, than we are here, or obviously, or for America, or for wherever, right? Or France, or Germany, whatever, right? It doesn't make any sense that would be the case. So if that is reasonable to say that as far as God is concerned, our collective accountability in this ambassadorial role is in the towns, cities, countries where we're at, then you cannot simultaneously justify the disproportionate departure of your funding base outside of the very place where you're saying you want the vision to succeed. Because for the vision to succeed, just as it was the case for the Prophet, peace be upon him as well, right, you have to align, as with any organizational vision or institutional vision, you've got to align. You've got to put your money where your mouth is. So if I can't say in this breath that I want this future, this bright future for Britain, etc., as far as and building this society, built on a foundation of monotheism, which is going to require significant investment in institutions, in all across the base, and also then simultaneously, go and take 95% of that money and go and send it left, right, and center. Now, even though that might be good, but is that aligned with where our ultimate responsibility or our highest responsibility lies? So you're saying, should the charities do? The charities should understand this vision and moderate themselves accordingly.
But the charities would come back, and I'm sure you've heard this before, they would say, look, we've tried this.
No, they haven't.
But the Muslims, whenever we tried it, Muslims don't go for it.
No, but they need to promote it. They need to believe in it first. Most of them don't believe in it. They don't believe it at that level. They don't. See, they only believe it. They only get it. Most of them only get it to the level of what's being said here. There are some poor people in this country, or some projects, so those need funding too. Almost like a tick box exercise to say, we're doing our local role as well. But it's always secondary, right? But as I said, you drop the brand, drop all of this stuff,
Yeah.
and you realize that what you're beneath the layers, what are you actually doing? You are, by putting yourself out there, making a particular invitation for people to give in a certain way, you're essentially saying, whether you've done it consciously or not, you're essentially saying that this is what we think is amongst the most worthy things, right, as far as God is concerned, that you as people in this country earning and living and doing whatever you're here, that you should be spending the disproportion of your money charitably in this particular way. So I'm saying that, like, that needs to be, like, if they can look to this vision level, right? So as directors or CEOs of their various organizations living in and around London, Birmingham, Manchester, wherever they are, and they realize that before they have this particular job in this particular organization, that they are believers, leaders, or in this community, in this country, and that there is a prime responsibility to a vision for Islam in this country, and understanding what that vision is, and that goes into their heart, right, before it goes into something. It's not like just a piece of a sort of just part and parcel of an overall strategy for an organization, but they understand that's something that they wish they want to contribute towards. Then I think that then they would promote it, because then it's not like, oh well, it's people, the community will believe in it when the leadership believes in it and promotes it. It's like people can only respond to the options that you give them, right?
And probably have to be a transition period as well, right?
No, there will be, but at this rate, the transition period will be thousands of years. No, I mean, at this rate, like, it's so slow.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, I agree with you. I think they're not, most charities, I don't think, are fundamentally aligned yet on the basic
but
point.
It's just the individuals.
But even if they are, even once they are convinced, I think you're going to have to. It's going to take time for the mass audience to get there, and I think you're going to have a transition period.
No, sure, but that transition period has already begun, right? I mean, things are transitioning. It's just transitioning slowly, but I think it will transition faster when there is a collective understanding for this. And this was the irony. Look, the irony of all of this is that, again, as I said earlier, is that if they took a long view, the long view of how, like, of why you would find yourself in a position to, like, how would you find yourself in a position where you're not having to provide relief money, in the context of certain issues and, things going on around the world, to the same level, is, again, I would say, precisely the extent to which you're able to build up your overall success and presence, like, in this country, and then influence things at a much higher level. A lot of what we're doing is this kind of firefighting, and also is taking this issue of sadaqah and zakat and everything in isolation. So at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and clearly from a Quranic standpoint, sadaqah and zakah are integrated parts of an overall mission and strategy. He wasn't, like, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was not. All the poverty relief and the support for those who are in need was in the context of this mission for monotheism. It wasn't just an isolated thing which he was just doing out of humanitarian kind of thing, just for the sake of the humanitarian thing, which is what our sadaqah and zakah has become today, by the way. It has. All it is, in the mind of the giver, it's about our reward in doing some good or in fulfilling some obligation, right? I would hazard a guess that most Muslim donors don't even follow up or particularly bothered by the net result of their donation. One of the evidences for that, I would say, is that this platform, My 10 Nights, for example, where they take this sort of gamified thing to Laylatul Qadr and all this stuff. I mean, that's another topic. But the point being is that they had this multi-charity pot. You can choose a particular charity, or you just have this multi-charity thing, just spread it wherever. And increasing over the years, they just had more and more people just doing multi-charity. You know? It's like whatever, wherever, it doesn't matter. Because I've got my reward, I've done it on Laylatul Qadr, etc. So I'm not saying everyone's like that, but I think most of the motivation for the Muslim giver is my acceptance with my Lord, my reward, I've done my bit, right?
Feel good.
Right. So whereas give it the point of, but so what we think is that that's what God wants. Just give wherever, as long as you, oh, good intention, brother, fine. Not as if he doesn't, not interested in. No. What are you achieving with this? The net effect of this, of this giving, and then again, as we said, to the extent to which resources are aligned with your stated vision.
Mr. Nasim, we've started one place, we've ended up at another. And we've covered a lot of ground, and there's a lot to digest. What's your take-home message for, first, just everyday Muslims, and many of us are everyday in some level, right? And then also the leadership of the Muslim community in wherever area they might be.
Sure. Well, even though we've covered a lot of diverse ground, it's all really connected to one. I think the way I would summarize it as a take-home sort of message is, so yeah, any individual in our community, whatever their quote unquote position, right, within the community is, the message is simply, first and foremost, to believe in the possibility of an outcome where this faith and its value is not just tolerated, but is appreciated and adopted as a way of life and as a governing kind of mechanism for how people sort of manage and run their own lives and how society functions. Once upon a time, it was inconceivable, and at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, it was inconceivable that certain places on earth would become countries, nations, empires that would exist and be governed on the particular foundation of what that prophetic message was, right? In some of those years in Makkah, right, the idea that then this faith would be, in the Indian subcontinent, halfway across Europe, in various areas, around the world, across the whole of Indonesia, for example, all of these places, it was inconceivable. We similarly here in the context of Britain and maybe more broadly the English-speaking countries where we are minority communities, it seems inconceivable that this faith might one day become the foundation for British society, American society, Australian society, right, or Western Europe. But the extent to which we think it's not realistic, or the extent to which we don't think about it as a possibility, I think will be self-fulfilling. I do think that a lot of this really depends on the extent to which we want, what we desire, because I do believe that divine decree meets with, our actual intentions and motivations. And in the Quran, we always are talking about victory and help for the community, like us as a community having a sense of victory and support and all of this stuff, and we want it. And sometimes it feels, when you look around the world and you look at different situations, as though we are far from having it. So sometimes it may feel as though all of this is inconceivable, that how could it be the case that British society, American society, Australian, wherever, Western Europe, might one day come to a stage where these societies actually function on a foundation of monotheism, where the value of this faith and, let's say, the Quranic conception and worldview kind of is manifesting in a 21st, 22nd century relevant way in all of these different aspects of life. It doesn't seem like it could happen. But I think it will happen to the extent that we think it will happen. We believe, we want it to happen. And that we have this, and that we don't need also, that we don't need all of the answers right now. There's lots of questions in terms of the how that we have no idea, like maybe yet, exactly how all of these different things will work. But that we should have a commitment to it, and therefore to realize that all of our individual interactions, whether it's interactions on our streets with our neighbors, at work, just on a day-to-day basis, right, through various institutions and individuals that we come across, all of these, like if we could have these interactions on the basis of, while simultaneously being aware of this bigger vision, right, having this prophetic concern for people to find the straight path and to find value in what we say we find value in, which is a connection to the divine, which is an understanding of the kind of having an accurate or more accurate perspective on what this world is actually all about. Like these are things which are universal propositions and ideas which we should not write people off from receiving, and we should open ourselves up to narratives, products, services, engagements that facilitate that as much as possible. And anyone and everyone, whoever you are, can have that. But at a leadership level, right, it becomes not just a kind of nice to have, but I would say necessary. And I think anybody who is running an organization where either explicitly or otherwise there is some sort of Islam, Muslim kind of component to it in terms of what's motivating it, in terms of the individuals there, in terms of who the beneficiaries or customers are, like should really think hard and carefully about the way in which they can, again, improve, adapt their offerings and their way of doing things that aligns with this much more open, universal, and accessible kind of message, essentially, and vision for the future. That really is what it's about. And in that,
does it need to be identifiable as Muslim? Because it's like, all right, our masajid should be open so that everyone come through.
Sure.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But the masjid is very identifiably Muslim.
Yeah.
Which I think is helpful because, like, obviously you're calling them to something.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like from an Islamic funds perspective, if they're searching on our Nest and they've got all these funds,
Sure.
and they're like, all right, this fund is doing well, so I really believe in it.
Yeah.
Like, should it not be like, if it's called ethical,
Yeah.
let's say, it won't immediately hit them that, all right, this is actually a kind of, these are the people behind it. I need to be joining this.
Well, yeah, no, I understand that, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be. It depends. It depends, and there might be. There's no one way for
Sure.
that. But I would certainly say this much: I don't think it's as important for things to be identifiably Muslim, with capital M, as it is important for it to be identifiably kind of
Useful.
universal. Useful, universal. But I was going to say more like faith-based, let's say, or
Right.
God-conscious, or God-centered in
Sure.
some way. So I think because for us, there is an overlap between these things, but in the public mindset, there isn't. Okay? So if you say Islam, Muslim in the public sense, and you talk about God-conscious or God-centeredness,
Yeah.
for us, these are one and the same, or they should
Yeah.
be, right? One and the same type of thing. But for the public, they're not necessarily. But again, I would challenge us to use things which are the lowest common denominator linguistically that gets the point across. And actually, again, I think that is reflective of the Quranic narrative. The vast majority, if not all of the references to Islam and Muslim in the Quran are lowercase references, if you know what I mean. They're not like,
Sure.
they're not kind of, you wouldn't translate them as Muslim capital M, actually. You would just translate them as submitting, devoting, committing, surrendering, these kinds of words, So for example, when Ibrahim is described as Hanifan Musliman, right? We don't say that he was Hanif capital H, right? And therefore also Muslim capital M.
Yeah.
We're basically saying he was pure in his faith and devoted, right? So the idea here is that I think terminology, this is where some of the terminology needs to be kind of figured out as well. So it might not be necessarily in that particular example, like while this filtering through the funds, and at this level you'll make the connection.
Yeah.
But at a broader level, can you make the connection between these? Can you make the connection between the source of inspiration? I think even simple things like the way we refer to the Quran, right? Like now, the way I like to refer to it, if I'm frankly even internally now, because I just try to unify wherever I'm speaking. But a great way to refer to it is the Final Testament, for example. Yeah. Because now you've got Old Testament, New Testament, you've got Final Testament.
Yeah.
So now in a way that it's inspired by the Final Testament. Perfect. So now, so we speak of it in a language that anyone can understand as confidently as members of other faiths or traditions will refer to their scriptures, books, whatever.
Yeah.
They're not using Syriac and Aramaic terms to represent what they're talking about, are they?
Yeah.
So similarly, like, why should we use?
Yeah.
Because let's put it this way: the Quran wouldn't have been called the Quran if it didn't happen to have been revealed in Arabia at the time, essentially.
Sure.
So why don't we just use words that don't take away from the substance of anything that we affirm, but just whilst making it as easily available and accessible to those around us. So I think, yes, the connection, as I said, between God and good, between faith and value, right? We need to make those connections for people, and we will do so if we want to do so, and that really is it, simply.
Jazakallahu khairan. Mr. Nasim, I and the great
Kabir.
Kabir and Khidr the Green. We're all very. I think it's been very insightful and illuminating.
Okay.
And we'll continue this. We'll get you back like a flu jab once a year, and then slowly but surely we'll get herd immunity, inshallah.
Well, may we be guided to whatever is best.
Ameen.